Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with our daily quiz and look at question number 1. Consider the following statements. Number 1, sedition law was inserted in the Indian Penal Code in 1870 in response to the Wahhabi movement. Number 2, sedition is one of the 8 reasonable restrictions on citizens' right to freedom of speech and expression under the Indian Constitution. Which of the above statements is or are correct? What is the context? This is page number 1 of today's The Hindu newspaper. Journalists need protection against sedition charges, says the Supreme Court, quashing the case against journalist Vinod Dua. When Indian Penal Code was enacted in the year 1860 by Lord Macaulay, sedition law was not part of it. It was only in the year 1870 that sedition was included under the Indian Penal Code under section 124 capital A. And this was during the time of Sir James Stephen. And this was in response to the Wahhabi movement. Because Sir James Stephen, what he said while introducing this bill to incorporate sedition in Indian Penal Code, he said that Wahhabis are going from village to village and they are preaching that it is the sacred religious duty of Muslims to wage war against the British rule. That is why, to penalize those who are promoting disaffection against the government established by law, sedition law was incorporated in the Indian Penal Code in the year 1870. We have freedom of speech and expression as a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a), but this is not an absolute fundamental right. There are 8 reasonable restrictions. For example, your freedom of speech and expression can be restricted on the grounds of security of the state, sovereignty of India, friendly relations with foreign nations, public order, incitement to an offense, defamation, morality or decency, contempt of court. There are 8 reasonable restrictions on your freedom of speech and expression, but sedition is not one of the reasonable restrictions. In fact, when the Constituent Assembly was set up to draft the Constitution of India, there was a committee established on fundamental rights. This committee was headed by Sardar Patel. This committee on fundamental rights did incorporate sedition as one of the reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. But after protest, after much debate in the Constituent Assembly, sedition was dropped as one of the reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. So which of the above statements is or are correct? A. Only one is correct. In fact, in the landmark 1962 Kedarnath Singh judgment, the Supreme Court said you can even promote disaffection against the government established by law, but don't incite people to violence. Incitement to violence can be sedition. Otherwise, you have the freedom of speech and expression even to criticize the government of the day. Now let's look at question number 2. Consider the following statements regarding Sustainable Development Goals India Index. Number 1, the index is intended to provide a holistic view on the social, economic as well as environmental status of the country and the states of India as well as the union territories. Goals 12, 13, 14 and 17 are excluded from the SDG India Index. Center and states as well as the union territories, they have the mandate to oversee the adoption and monitoring of the SDGs in the country, and the index was launched in the year 2018. This Sustainable Development Goal India Index is released by Niti Aayog, and this index is prepared in consultation with states, union territories, United Nations agencies in India, several union ministries, and the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. This index was launched in the year 2018, and in 2021, the 3rd edition has been released. So this index, yes, it is intended to provide a holistic view on the social, economic, and environmental status of the country. When the index was launched in the year 2018, you would know that there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. When the index was launched in 2018, Goals 12, 13, 14 and 17 were not taken into consideration to prepare this index. But in the third edition, goals 12, 13, 14 have been included, and on goal 17, qualitative assessment has been provided. So statement 2 is incorrect. Statement 3 is wrong because this is not the job of the center and the states or union territories. This is the job of the Niti Aayog to oversee the adoption and monitoring of the SDGs in the country. And the index was launched in 2018, so 1 and 4 are correct. A is the right answer. What is the context? This is today's The Hindu newspaper. Significant progress in SDGs on clean energy and health, says the Niti Aayog's index. And Kerala is once again on the top. The score ranges between 0 to 100. A state or a union territory scoring 0 to 49, they come under this category aspirant. Those in the range of 50 to 64, they are performers. 65 to 99, they are front runners. And score of 100 means achiever. What do we mean by an achiever? We will discuss towards the end of this quiz that these 17 sustainable development goals, they should be implemented by the year 2030. So if there is a state or a union territory which has achieved the score of 100, we can say that this state or a union territory has achieved this target which was to be achieved by 2030. Now let's look at question number 3. And what is the context? Again, today's The Hindu newspaper. Strong policies on black carbon can sharply cut glacier melt, says the World Bank study. What are these black carbon deposits? These are formed through incomplete combustion of fossil fuels, biofuel and biomass. And what are these black carbon deposits? They're basically short-lived pollutants and which are considered as the second largest contributor to global warming. And you would know the largest contributor to global warming is the carbon dioxide. So statement 1 is correct. How are these black carbon deposits formed? Through incomplete combustion of biomass. Let's say, for example, if we use wood for cooking purposes, the incomplete combustion of the wood, what it would lead to? The formation of black carbon deposits. So if we start using more and more LPG cylinders, liquefied petroleum gas for cooking purposes, it can cut these black carbon emissions. So statement 2 is also correct. Statement 3 is incorrect. Why? What is the surface reflectance? It's basically the amount of light which is reflected by the surface of the earth. Because of these black carbon deposits, they decrease the surface reflectance of sunlight, which basically leads to the increase in the air temperature, and that is why it leads to global warming. So statement 3 is incorrect. Statement 4 is correct because these black carbon deposits, they raise the air temperature. So 1, 2, 4, B is the right answer. Now let's look at question number 4. And for that, let's look at the context. This is today's Business Standard newspaper, the farm factor. Which of the following statements is or are correct? India's overall import dependence for edible oils has ended in 2021. In 2020-21, the production of food grains has decreased when compared to the figures of 2019-20. India's agricultural exports have shrunk by nearly 18% in 2020-21 to meet the domestic food needs. Which of these statements is or are correct? If we look at the country, the growth in almost all the sectors or most of the sectors is under pressure. But the farm sector stands out because of its performance, and it has shown impressive performance. We have seen that there is an increase in the production of edible oils. But despite the fact that there has been an increase in the production of edible oils, we are still dependent upon imports to meet our edible oil needs. So statement 1 is incorrect because yes, there has been an increase in the production of edible oils, but even then we are import dependent. Number 2, the production of food grains has basically increased corresponding to last year. That's why statement 2 is incorrect. And on top of that, despite the fact that we need food grains to meet the domestic requirements, we have Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, we have the National Food Security Act. Despite domestic requirements, agricultural exports have basically increased in 2020-21. All these statements are incorrect. D is the right answer. Now let's look at a previous year's question paper, Prelims 2015. Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana has been launched for promoting financial inclusion in the country. C is the right answer. Let's look at the fact of the day, Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. These were set up in the year 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly, and these goals are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. That's why we also call them Agenda 2030. And there are basically 17 goals. Goal 1, no poverty, zero hunger, so on and so forth. These are the 17 goals. When the first SDG India Index was launched in the year 2018, Goal 12, 13, 14 and 17, these were excluded. And if you look at, each goal is also associated with targets. What are these targets? For example, Goal 1 talks about no poverty. Under this no poverty goal, there are targets. What are these targets? For example, we have to reduce the poverty by half. That's one target. We have to implement social protection systems. That's another target. And these 17 sustainable development goals, they came into force with effect from 1st January 2016. And one important statement for your prelims examination, these sustainable development goals, they are not legally binding. That is it from our daily quiz. Thank you for being with us. Have a great evening.